Okay, we'll get started. We're on Daf Yud Testament Aleph. We'll take a look at that. We'll go through this Gemara together. It's a little bit of a complicated Gemara. It's not so long, but there's a lot of complications in it. So Shabbos Yud Testament Aleph, which is our sugya today, which hopefully we'll get from here to at least to the Shulchan Aruch. Tanu Rabbanan. Aim the Shalchin Igrois Biad Nachri Erev Shabbos and the Imkan Kotzitz Ladamim. You can't send letters Erev Shabbos unless you have your kotzitz. So you set a price, which we learned all along, that turns you into a contractor. Your kotzitz, you're setting him up to do this job. You're not paying by the day, by the hour. You're paying him for the job, and your kotzitz the damim. So he's a contractor, and you make a kotzitza, which turns it into the fact that if he does take it on Shabbos, we say bidudei ka'asik. He's doing it for himself. And the Gemara goes, the Brisa goes on to say, B'shamei omrim kadesh yakia lebeso, B'sil omrim kadesh yakia lebeso samach l'choyma. So you have to send it early enough on Friday that B'shamei says has to be able to get to the house of the person. L'chora means the house person you're sending it to. B'sil will say to the Baisa samach l'choyma, which the postman would say means the first house within, not outside, but inside the choma of the city that you're getting to, which I'm assuming now it means the first house in the closest entrance to the city, which we'll see that there are those that learn the opposite, maybe the furthest entrance to the city. So those are the two shitas, and why you have to get to that spot exactly according to Beis Hillel, not so clear. We'll have to see why. So, Va'alo katzatz, so ask the Gemara, your kotzitz. We just started saying you can't send it unless you're kotzitz. If you're kotzitz, then who's going to look at where you're going to get to? Why are you putting stipulations? Why are you putting limitations on when you can send it? If it was kotzitz, then it's not considered the Jew's ASIC anymore. It's not your geschäft. It's not your issue of where he gets and what he does and where he goes, and because he's considered he's b'didei asik. He's doing it adaita de nafshe. He's not doing it for you anymore. It's not considered your ASIC. So Valo katzatz. Amar sheish is hacha kamar. So the brisa, the shot in the brisa is in loy katzatz. The Reisha says you can't send it elim ken katzatz. Now, if you didn't, now you have a machlokas beisham beisil. Beisham omrim atchigia beisil omrim atchigia the brisa samal chayim. So it comes out then an interesting thing that there is a heter of lo katzatz, but that's only going to be if you get to a certain place. We have to have a certain taliyah that if you can get to a certain place before Shabbos, then we'll assume that something, we have to make some assumption, which we're not sure what that assumption is yet. How does that really help? If he's working for you, because it's not lo katzat, so he's really your shliach, so what is this Indian of the Baisa Samach L'chama? What does that do with the whole shlichos over here? And that's basically sort of the Gemara's question. So the Gemara says, Va'amart Reisha Emesh Shalchin. The Reisha said, Emesh Shalchin, period. Now the question, what Reisha do we mean over here? Either we mean the Reisha of the Brisa itself. If we mean the Reisha of this Brisa we're learning, Emesh Shalchin Igos Biad Nachri, so then why is that a kasha? But the Reisha said Emesh Shalchin. We just explained the answer to that. We just said that we just made it a kimta that the Reisha is talking about katzatz, and the Seif is talking about lo katzatz. So that's the kasha of the Tosas Yeshanim over here on the side. It says Tema Dilma Reisha Hakamar Emesh Shalchin B'Einu Yochol Hagia. You can't sell it if you can't get to the spot you need to get to. Elim Ken Katzatz. Vainu B'Plukta, and then that's totally the Machlokes Beis Hillel V'Shamai. The Seifa B'Shlo Katzatz Yochol Hagia the Shari. So, like, what do you mean? What's the worst kasha? So he wants to say that we're talking about the first brisa. When it says here, Vatanya Valmarta Reisha Emin Shalchin, it's going back to the previous brisa before we just learned today. The brisa we learned last week goes back by the two dots. Tan Rabbanan Lo Yaskir Adam Kela L'Nachar Erev Shabbos Dal Hemuter Kiyotzabo Emin Shalchin Igos Biad Nachar Erev Shabbos Dal Hemuter. So we just said the Erev Shabbos you can't do it. There's no stipulation over there of where you can get to or katzatz or anything. It's just a dry halacha. We didn't have any stipulations there at all. So referring back to that brisa, that's the kasha of the Gemara. So the Gemara answers, lo kasha, hada kavia beidora b'mata, hada lo kavia beidora b'mata. If you have these two things, if you were not kotetz, so the brisa that we're learning our brisa now that says that there's a heter, if you can get to a certain spot and everything, that's if there's kavia beidora b'mata, if there is a kaviyas of a post office. And with pashtas it means, we'll assume now it means in the city where you're sending it to. That it's being sent to, if it either directly, you're trying to send it directly to the guy it's sent to, but if not, you'll end up at the post office, so you have where to drop it off. You're not going to end up walking through the city looking for the guy because you have a central place to drop it. Or it means to begin with, the shlichos was to bring it to the beidor. There never was a shlichos to bring it to the guy's house. Since that's the way that things work in those days, you bring a letter to a certain place and then they send it out from there. The central place for that central beidor, for that post office, then it was sent out to everybody else in the city. So then that's not a problem if we can get to the beidor. The ratio, meaning that the previous brisa that says that there's no heter at all, that's when there is no beidor b'mata. There is no post office over there. So Rashi explains, we'll see in a minute, so Rashi explains the concern is, take a look at the Rashis. Elim ken kotzatz l'damim. Rashi says, the came into kotzatz l'damim b'didei tarach. Like we said, once there's ktitza, it's considered his own asik. V'shamer lo modu b'katzatz. Afila b'katzatz pligi. Dalo odef imocher mashal v'nosim betona. So Rashi puts out an important yesod that the whole concept of katzatz, Beishamah doesn't hold of. Because we have a whole list of things that you can't do in Erev Shabbos previously in the Mishnah and then the Brises previously to this, not part of our sugya. The Beis Shammai offered many things to be done in Erev Shabbos. This is no different. And over there's no stipulation of katzatz, no shayach. So over here as well, doesn't help to have katzatz. So Beis Shammai doesn't hold with the whole concept of katzatz. We're not going to go into, but it'll be an interesting discussion of what is the machlokas Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, whether katzatz matters or not. But we're not going to go into that. Ela milsa de Beis Hillel ashminin, but it's coming to tell us a chiddush in Beis Hillel that with lo katzatz, lo pligi to usher. The Beis Hillel that generally is tolek and Beis Shammai in saying that it's mutter to send it, that's only when it was katzatz. Lo katzatz is masking that it's usher unless you can get to a certain spot. So what is lebeso? Rashi says Smicha nishtalach lo. Beso does not mean, according to Rashi, the house of the post office. It means the house of the guy you're sending it to. And Beis Hillel says the closest house within the walls of the city that it was sent to. So we're told that since I guess the pshat will be, and there's a prima gana mashma this way, that since talking about an Isser D'Rabbanan over here, the whole Isser is D'Rabbanan to begin with. So that he might carry it further or whatever. And so the whole question of what might happen afterwards is also a Shala D'Rabbanan. So for that, we can be tola tliya that perhaps this guy lives as close as possible to the Knesset of the city. So once he gets to the beginning of the city, it's considered like perhaps it means like the shlichus ends at that point. And now what the guy does will be on his own right to try to make sure to get it to the best place possible. But the shlichus really ends at that point. Or we're tola that the guy might be there, so then that's good enough that we can be samach on that. It's a chiddush. When we see the Rambam, we'll see the Rambam makes the chiddush a little bit more understandable of why we can make this tliya. We'll wait to get to the Rambam.
Rabbi.
So Rashi goes on. So the Gemara asks, "V'alo katzatz, amai asher Beis Hillel ha'inu shari le'el." Amar Reisha emishalchen beidor. Rashi says, "Shultan eir v'lo regilim l'shlach igros." So there's some kind of the ruler of the city, the mayor or something like that, we send it to him, and he takes care of the mail from there. And Rashi explains the last thing, shlicha b'mata, if it's found in the city, mishalchen below kotzetz, then you're allowed to send it without ktitza, so now Rashi seems to be changing. Rashi originally said, according to Beis Shammai, that the pshat is you have to get to the house of the one you sent it to. So now Rashi says, no, it means the first Mar is Beis Shammai. And it says, the Mar the Beis Hador. The Mar the Beis Samach L'choma. So Rashi is explaining what so not to be a steer in Rashi before he said it's the guy, and now he's saying it's the post office. Rashi is learning the Pashtus that the Gemara changed. That once we once we introduce this idea of Beidar, so then it's no longer an Indian to be sholeach to the house of the guy himself. That's out of the picture now. When there's Beidar Be'ir, then the place to bring it to, Bais, the Beiso means to the Beidar, according to Beis Shammai now. And Beis Hillel, so then Beis Shammai is a Choma, and Beis Hillel will be the Bais of Samach L'choma. It's a little bit closer. The Beidar is somewhere in the middle of the city, and the Bais of Samach L'choma, that's the first step, the first house within the city. This is you can calculate the amount of time needed. They're pretty good at their calculations, I guess, because to know the city very well and know how long exactly it takes to walk and how much time differential there is between walking in the city and then getting to within the middle of the city. I guess people could know that if it's a common thing being done. Okay, so that's the sugi according to Rashi. Okay. Now the Rambam seems to have done the case a little bit different. Rambam is Perek Vav Halacha Chaf. Just to read it off, and there's other Nakudas also to go into, but and as far as this prat of what exactly is happening with the Beidar, and why are we allowed to be samach on this kula that it's going to be the first house that you walk into, and Hatesi, the guy that's being sent to, if it's going to the Beidar, fine, but if it's going to we're trying to accomplish to get it to the guy you're sending to, why does it help to send it to the Bais of Samach L'choma? So the Rambam says, Hanosin igeres legoy leholicha leira acheres. Im katzatz imo schar holacha mutter. So first of all, he starts off with the din katzatz, then there's no stipulations. Afil the national le'er Shabbos im kashecha, u'shiyetzim in Pesach beiso kodem Shabbos. As long as he leaves the Jew's house before Shabbos, then he's okay. Then we don't care if there's time to get what there's all the times, everything is off. Once it's katzatz, so you made a makablin and it's katzatz, then we say, Adaited in Meshaychavi. He's working for himself at this point. So we're not responsible. We don't really care. In loy katzatz, but if you did not stipulate, so you're not paying him by the job anymore, you're paying him by the time, he becomes your worker, your shliach. Lo katzatz essentially turns him into your shliach. So now it depends. Im yesh b'medina adam kavua shu mekabatz igois v'shaleach osam l'chol medina im shluchav mutar litan l'goy heigeres. If there's a person that collects all the letters and sends them to every medina with his messengers, then you're allowed to give the goy the igeres. As long as it can get through him to the Bais of Samach L'choma on Shabbos. Why? Maybe the house of the one that collects the letters and sends them out is close to the Choma. So the Rambam seems to sort of contradict himself. At the beginning of the Rambam was mashma, we're talking about the Beidar is in your city. If you're sending it through a shliach, through a Beidar, then it's okay. But then he turns around and talks about the one who collects letters and sends them is his house, which I guess he means his post office, is Samach L'choma. So the Rambam is learning Samach L'choma is not talking about the house of the one you're sending it to, it's the Beidar. It's the Beidar of Samach L'choma. So not like Rashi, that we're making a tzliya that the one you're sending it to happens to live there or will pick it up somehow from Samach L'choma. That rather, since we don't really know, we're tola that perhaps that the mail service is Samach L'choma. then it becomes difficult to understand because he finishes off and says, "Ein sham adam kavua lekach." There's no one really kavua for that. El hagoy shenosan lo igros hu sham alicha le'ira cheres. Also, the shloach b'yad goy higeres l'olam you can't katzatz l'damin. You can't send it unless your kotzitz damin. You have to have an adam kavua. So the whole Rambam seems to be very difficult to understand. Like from the Reisha to the Sefer, what is he talking about? Is he talking about that there's a post office in your city, which is mashma that way, and is mashma that he's only matir this because the one that you give it to is not the one that's actually going to take it. That's clear from the words of the Rambam, which this would be a precedent for the concept, which we'll talk about later, of which is called Amira la Amira. The poskim have coined that phrase Amira la Amira. Certainly not going to talk about this. We discussed this back in the day. We'll come back to it again, just to review a little bit the concept of the shaila of sending like an overnight letter, which we'll get to at the end. Do overnight from Friday to Shabbos. So one of the correspondence that the Achronim make is Amira la Amira, that maybe perhaps Amira la Akam is usher if I give it to a guy to take it and to do the malacha of carrying it. That's one thing, but if I give it to him and he hires someone else to do it, so the one that's actually taking it is not the one that I spoke to, then that's Amira la Amira, and it's one step removed from Amir la Akum, and it becomes a shvus to shvus, one step removed, then there's a heter of that. So Shiur and Shin Vav talks about this and says not to be some kind of chatchila, but there is such a svara out there to be some kind at certain situations. So this Lashon Rambam would seem to indicate that concept, because the Rambam says, it stipulates and says, "Im lo katzatz." If there is in the Medina adam kavua shu makabetz igos, he collects the letters. B'shaleach osam l'chol Medina im shluchav. He sends them out with his shluchim. Like who cares about that? It sounds like the Rambam was trying to accomplish over here a situation of Amira la Amira, which would then be mashma that the place of that you're sending it through, the Beit Dor that you're sending it through is in your city. It's in the city of the one that's sending it, not in the city you get to. But then the Rambam says, "Hushia shos b'yam kadesh yagia l'bay samachama shema zeh shema kabetz igros v'sholchan beso samachamahu." Now suddenly that the guy who's collecting the letters, maybe you could say there's two of them. There's someone who collects it in your city and sends it out, and there's someone who collects it over there and then sends it to the homes. But it's not mashma that way. It sounds like we're talking about the same person. So it's very not clear from the Rambam where we're talking about. I mean, when with the Lashon Rambam that we're talking about a concept of Amira la Amira, it's one step removed. So the whole thing is a chiddush that we're asking at all. We can understand better the tzliya that we're making in Beis Hillel, that it should be Baisa Samach L'choma, that perhaps it's there. You don't know, but perhaps it's there. How you're allowed to rely on perhaps. Because the whole thing is a child of Rabbanan with a kula of Amira la Amira, and so we're allowed to be told at Tzliya that's going to that city, then if there's a perhaps, that's good enough to be told on. So it makes it better with the Rambam, but still the Rambam, the lesson is very difficult. The Kesef Mishnah over here has a long discussion about what does the Rambam really mean. He's bothered by a lot of these questions. And he starts off learning the Rambam that the Baisa Samach L'choma is the more distant Choma. It's the further away Choma. So the Yukolinic is Taliya, the Beis Shammai is talking about actually taking to the guy's house, directly to the house. And Beis Hillel says, no, it's enough to go to the Beit Dor. Beis Hillel is being Samach on the Beit Dor. But that's only if you can get to the furthest by Samach L'choma, to the furthest Choma, away from where you are, because then within that amount of space, for sure, you've covered wherever the Beit Dor is. So it's a lot less of a tzliya. It just means you're for sure covered. But then Beis Yosef is bothered by that. The Kesef Mishnah is bothered by that because he says it comes out according to that. Then Beis Hillel is a chumrah over Beis Shammai, because Beis Shammai say you can get to the guy's house in the middle of the city, and you say no. The Beis Hillel says that's to go even further to the end of the city. So he's chozer from that and says that the Rambam really means it's closer, the wall is closer, and here it says at the end. We can see it inside. Even after what he says, the whole thing still remains sort of unclear what the Rambam really means. In the Beis Yosef, when he brings the Rambam down, he goes back to his original shot that is talking about the furthest choma. And I'm not sure why he went back on his shot in Kesef Mishnah. He wrote Beis Yosef after he wrote Kesef Mishnah. He already had that back and forth and decided that it's the closer choma, not the further choma. And then Beis Yosef goes back to the further choma. So I saw some Achronim point that out. Perhaps he was choser again back to this shot because otherwise, why do we make this tliya? He didn't understand why we could be told so much lahakel, and maybe you can answer that the reason Beis Hillel is not considered a chumrah over Beis Shammai is because Beis Hillel does have a general kula over here of katzatz that Beis Shammai doesn't have, so that would still keep Beis Hillel a lot more lakula than Beis Shammai is, even though for this prat it might be more of a chumrah. So it's difficult, not so clear how the Rambam was learning, but okay, we'll get to the prat later. Okay, so that's insofar as this question of, that's what I meant, that it's a difficult sugya. It's a short sugya, but it's very difficult. There's a lot of like nebulous points over here that just not so clear. Why do we make this? Nobody talks about why we make this taliyah. Why Beis Hillel says it's enough. I saw someplace, maybe find for you. Oh, yeah. There's a Pri Megadim. It's the Mishpah of Sukkot and Beis, that since the Isser is only D'Rabbanan, therefore we're told to say that the Beis Hador will be Samach Chachoma. And so it's just like a regular, it's one of these Tuliyah Dikasoras that we say we're told Hakel by Shalat D'Rabbanan. Still a little strange because Mechatesi lived right there, and that should be the first thing in the city, but unless that's a common thing for post offices to be an entryway to the city, which makes some sense. That's the first thing you hit when you walk in. And Shulchan Aruch Harav says that you're told to say that the person you're sending it to lives in the Baisa Samach Chachoma. That's a much bigger tliya, much bigger, a stranger kula, to make that tliya that Mechatesi should live the first house in. So every time you send a letter, the guy might be living in that first house on the way in. So that's a little strange to me, but Tzarachiyun. Okay, another important nakuda here is that the Rosh and the end of Siman Lamed Vav, Medayek, he says, the Rosh says the following: Kiyotzabo im shalchen igros biyad nachri be'erev Shabbos v'dala v'hei mutter. Hananami mishum de mixi k'shlucha shel Yisrael. So if you look like the shlucha shel Yisrael, then why is it mutter v'dala v'hei? Why is that okay? So he says the dafka be'erev Shabbos mixi k'omer lo sheyelach l'machar b'shluchuso amir le'nachri shvus. So it's only similar to what we saw last week, the last halacha in Reish Vav by the Haskar Sakelim, that if he's masquerade to him on Erev Shabbos, then he begins working on Shabbos, then it's mixay, like he's doing, like that you asked him to do that malacha, he's doing that malacha for you. But if his dalad b'hei was mutter because it's removed from Shabbos, so we don't have such a gzer that it's mixing like that. So the Rosh learns it's the same thing, which that's it's our brisa here. The brisa said, the brisa in the beginning said dalad b'hei mutter. That's the difference in the two brises. The first brisa said, the first Tanur Rabbanan, when it put it together with Haskaras Kalim, so it said Kiyotzabo im shalchen igros biyad nachi erev Shabbos dalad b'hei mutter. It was matter of dalad b'hei, and our brisa doesn't say a word about dalad b'hei. But so the Rosh learns that the halacha is like the first brisa, and it's just mefarish that's in the second brisa. And the svara is the same svara that we said by Kalin. There's only mixi when it's actually done. We have B'tzirif, other factors, plus that it's done Erev Shabbos. Vafilim Amrlo Erev Shabbos Asay Zeh b'Shabbos. Ava Muflag L'Fnei Shabbos Lo Mixi Ka'Amrlo Asay Melachti b'Shabbos. If you give it to him a little further away from Shabbos, it doesn't look like you're asking him to do it on Shabbos. So the whole problem over here is really a Maras Ayin problem, that it looks like he's if he's doing it for you on Shabbos. You asked him to do it on Shabbos. Lav Dafka, you did. It ends off, V'chen Oros L'Avdon V'Kelim L'Kobos V'Dal V'Hei Mutter Al Pi Shelo Katzatz. So there's a heter of those other kalim things also. You give a kalim to a koves, you give it to a laundromat, or to a dry cleaner on Dal V'Hei, it's mutter even though you weren't kotzets. That's what the Rush says, and Tosa says that as well. But the Rif and the Rambam leave this out. The Rif and the Rambam don't say a word about Dal V'Hei. The Rambam we just read said Hanosan Igros Lagoy Lo Licha Le'irach Eretz in Katzatz Imos Charo Lacha Mutter. But feeling Nosan Erev Shabbos, it's okay as long as he leaves Friday. Even Lo Katzatz, the only stipulation he makes is if there's a Beidor or not. And if you can get there in time to whatever that stipulation of time is. But there's no word in the Rambam or in the Rif about Dal V'Hei. Those mashma, if you have a Rishon Nami, even if you gave it on Sunday, if you didn't stipulate, if the guy might end up delivering on Shabbos, according to the Rambam, it's still a problem. It's still an issue. And the Brisa said by us, Erev Shabbos. Not only the first Brisa, but our Brisa also says, Tanar Rabban Im Shalchan Igros B'Yad Nochi Erev Shabbos. So that would seem to be clearly indicate that this Brisa is also going like the previous Brisa. So the Beis Yosef has two terutzim. One is Lav Dafka. It means anything before Shabbos is Erev Shabbos. And that's a very straight teretz, because Erev Shabbos till now always meant Erev Shabbos. But I think there are, there is a shtukal makkah for it, that there's a chazal that says a mashal for olam hazet olam haba that call hatareach Erev Shabbos yochel b'Shabbos. So it doesn't mean to say that this this whole 6,000 years is like Friday as opposed to Sunday. Erev Shabbos there means everything but Shabbos. So perhaps that you can learn that way here as well, but it's a docha to say that. But the other pshat the Beis Yosef says is that it's not coming to tell you a chiddush of when it is usher, because that's pasha, like it's sort of guilty to prove an innocent. It's telling you a kula that when it is katzatz, it's mutter even on Erev Shabbos. So it's not telling you the Isser is only on Erev Shabbos. It's just it's telling you that the heter is even on Erev Shabbos when you are kotzitz. Right. So that's the other shot. The teretz of the Rambam and Lashon and Brisa. Al Kapanim, we do see from the Rambam that there is no heter of any other day. You need either katzatz or these other stipulations that you need. You have to be able to get to where you have to get to, whether it's Friday or it's Wednesday. It doesn't make a difference, according to the Rif and the Rambam. That's an important nekuda of the sugya. And one more important nekuda of the sugya before we're going on to the Shulchan Aruch, at least one more, is that the Bach over here speaks out, the Bach in the beginning of the Siman on the tour. So he asks, there's a basic elemental kasha on the sugya that if this is a general concept, like Tosos in the Rush, it said over here that this concept of katzatz applies not only to igros, but it's the same thing applies to oros la'avdan. To if you give a goy leather to work the leather, turn it into a baseball mitt or a pair of shoes, or you give him the kovis, you give your suit to the dry cleaners. So all this is mutter when it's katzatz. So the klal of katzatz over here in the brisa of letters applies also to other work that goy does. So then, if so, the question is, why do we pick igros in this brisa? If it's saying in a general klal, then why do we specifically talk about igros? It's a little bit of a strange kind of case, like the malacha is not so clear what you're doing. Okay, Rabin, whatever. Like a lot of malachos are a lot more matzoi than shaluach igros. If you're coming to tell me a general principle of katzatz, tell it to me about. Give me a few examples, or tell me a more rugged example. Why are we picking on igros? That's a box kasha. So he answers in the name of a few Rishonim, a Gedolah Rishonim, the Sefer Truma and the Mordechai. He wants to say that when loy katzatz is only also by igros, not by other forms of malacha. Why? Because igros, since it's written in Hebrew, it's written in a way that's clearly a Jewish letter. Let me just close the door. Right, since it has Hebrew on it, or it's in some way it's nicker that it's Iksav Yisrael, and the goy is carrying it, so then people think that a Jew gave this to him to carry on Shabbos, because it's clearly a Jewish thing, and it's a little bit similar to the Isser of having a goy do work for you in your own house on Shabbos. Even though we said you're allowed to give Oros L'Avdan, the Gemara says that you can give Oros L'Avdan or a Kovis, things to do, work to do, but that work cannot be done in the house of Yisrael, because it is Nicker is being done for Yisrael and has Marasayan and everything. It's much more Chomer, the base Yisrael. So you might have thought, and over there, does it even help katzatz? If I'm kotzetz with I don't know, for a guy to work my leather and turn it into a pair of boots. So even if I'm kotzetz and he's really adaited and nafshei of it, and he's working for himself and everything, but he's going to do it in my garage, it's usher. Can't be done by Beis Yisrael. Because it's nicker Yisrael, and that creates a different level of Marasayan. When it's nicker like that, Yisrael, it becomes like over there when it's in the Beis Yisrael, it's tantamount to the Isra that we had to do a Vodas Karka, to build a house for a Jew, or to any Vodas Karka is always before time, and that's usher.
At what point does that if a guy is walking into your house, why does anyone know why they're walking into your house? I mean, they can't even enter. Period. Is it saying?
Is that everybody knows everything. Everyone's watching everything. They're all. It seems that the yenta factor was very, very high. Everyone knows exactly what's on it. I mean, you'll see. We'll see from the teretz of the Beis Yosef and the Bach. I mean, and what the Chachamim say about it, even further than that. So they say that the fact that there's Jewish writing on this letter, people are going to notice there's Jewish writing in a letter of a goy who's carrying a letter to be delivered. Right? So they're already looking in there, like going walking by with letters, and they're looking in there, and they're seeing that there's they got all the binoculars on, and they're thinking, oh, Jewish writing in a goyish letter. It must be that a Jew sent to this goy Shabbos. Ashanda. And it's going to be a whole thing, it's going to send, Marasayan, whatever, the whole thing's going to go on. But they're mamish knowing, exactly what's going on. So we might have thought. So here the answer. It doesn't help katzatz, just like it doesn't help katzatz for a guy to work that was katzatz for Beis Yisrael. We might have thought that Igeris is in the same level as that. Kamash Malan, that's not quite as chomer as being in the Beis Yisrael, and katzatz does help. And that's the chiddush of this sugya, according to the Sefer Truma and the Mordechai. So it comes out though, besides the chiddush, like there's a suffix in the Marsham, the Jewish Marsham has a suffix of, like the postman say based on this, that if the letter was written, if a Jew sends a letter that's written in not in Hebrew, it's just written in English, there's no Isser. It's no different than Oros L'Avdan either. It comes exactly the same thing. It sort of falls off. And then Marsham has a suffix if it's written in English, but it's signed in Hebrew. The Jew signs in Hebrew. Is the signature enough to make it a problem? Which means that the people are noticing as the goy walks along. First of all, I guess it's not in an envelope; it's an open letter, and you're noticing that it's, or I don't know what's written on the envelope or something. People are noticing that, and they notice that it's in English, but there is a Jewish signature. So they're looking pretty well what's going on, like the iyun of everything passing by. The level of noticing that's pretty high. Halacha l'maisa, what comes out from that shot, that those Rishonim were learning that Shar Dvarim, like Oros La'avdan, that don't have a Shem Yisrael written on it, or the suit to be done or whatever. So all those things don't have, there's no Hebrew on it. It's not clearly a Jewish thing. So then it's mutter even with low katzatz. As long as you're going to pay the guy by the job, not by the hour, then according to those Rishonim, it's mutter even below katzatz. So that comes out to be a major yisodas to kamachot Rishonim in the sugya. According to Tosfos and the Rosh, that it's Oros La'avdan itself needs to have katzatz. That's a never pasha to them. So the boss says, according to the Tosfos and the Rosh, even Oros needed. So then Hadra Kushal Adukta. Then why do we pick Igros over here? Why do we pick Igros? So he says, even according to them, also you might have thought that Igros is more chamor than Oros La'avdan. That katzatz won't even help. Because it's nicker, that it's a Jewish thing, they also might have thought it has a din like in the house of a Jew. The katzatz wouldn't even help. But the Maisa does help. So it comes out then that everyone is agreeing that katzatz does help by igros, and you need katzatz by igros, but then it will remain a machlokas though, that according to Tosfos and the Rosh, not only by igros, but also by Oros La'avdan and all other malachos that a goy does, even if it's not nicker Yisrael, you need to have, not only is he a kabbalah, not only is he working by the job instead of by the hour, but also you need katzatz. You need to prearrange the amount you're going to pay him. And according to the Mordechai and the Sefer Truma, only igros need katzatz. But other types of work, like we mentioned, they're mutter even without katzatz. They're mutter just because you're a kabbalah. And if you didn't set a price, it's still mutter. The Shulchan Aruch paskins like Tosfos and the Rosh, but it's important to know that there is another shita out there. It's always important to know that. I was just giving a class last week they just came in. There's a big group of girls here on the Shabbaton, partially some from, some not from, and so I was supposed to talk about halacha with them. And so they're asking questions. One of the things we discussed is that I was talking about asay l'charav, how important it is to asay l'charav means not just you create a rab and asay l'charav. No, it's asay l'charav. Make for yourself a rab, meaning that it's not enough to go to a rab, but make for yourself a rab. Make a connection with somebody that you have a relationship with, so they know who you are, you know where they are. They can talk to you about you from at the point that where you're at and where you're coming from, and so I said it's so important because, for example, you learn a sugya and Gemara, and we have so many different shitas Rishonim, but you have a final psak of the Shulchan Aruch. So what do we need to talk about the other Rishonim for, and get them so clear? Just know clearly the psak of the Shulchan Aruch. That's the psak, right? The answer is that true. That's the general mainstream psak. But there's such thing as shas v'chak. Difficult situations can come up. I said, especially for like Bala Tshuva, that you might have shalom bais issues with parents and things, different things. So if someone's a real posek, not only do they know what the Shulchan Aruch says, but they also know the other shitas, and they know that there's times that like shas have to rely on sometimes the more lenient opinions, or sometimes fakir you have to be more machmer because of others. There's a lot of factors that come into a psak. So if someone's a real posek and they know that, then they're able to weigh things like that in combination with it. They know you and they know what issues that you're involved in. So just a little side note, because we're just talking about it here, that true, the psak halacha is like the Tosfos and the Rosh, that without katzatz, everything's asur. Other types of work are asur, but we do have a Mechubedika Shita over here, which is the Sefer Truma and the Mordechai, that holds that they do not need katzatz, which will be, we'll have to see when, but there might be certain shas situations that you might be able to matter without katzatz based on those shitas. Okay, so that's as far as the sugya. Now, just some points in the Shulchan Aruch. Wish I had my notes with me to talk more, but so the Mishavura starts off the Siman based on what we just said. It just starts right off with the Magen Avraham says, when it says in the Shulchan Aruch in Sif Aleph, in Reish Ram Zayin, Shalech Adam Igeres Biad Ein Yehudi, even Erev Shabbos and Kashecha, as long as you're katzatz. So the Mishavura starts right away. Who did Shar Malachas, B'chol Malachas. If you give it to him before Shabbos, there's not enough time to finish by Shabbos, then you need katzatz. You need yichtzav lo damim. You have to say the set amount that you're going to be paying him. It has to be said. An example of this would be, it's Shmir Shabbos Kachasa, they bring from Shlomo Zalman, that's all, that if a goy is going to be writing a certain letter, but it's important you have a copy of it, and the goy is going to be writing a letter on Shabbos, so you can't ask him to make a copy for you, or in his days, it was using carbon paper, to ask him to, when you write the letter, please do it with carbon paper, so I'll have a copy also. It's tantamount to me asking him to write a letter on Shabbos. However, the Minchas Yitzchak says, though, that obviously if you are going to pay him not for the pula, but for the letter, you're going to pay him for the actual letter, and your code says a certain amount to pay him, so then that's okay. Because you're not stipulating he does it on Shabbos, just you happen to know he's going to do it on Shabbos. You're not stipulating, you're not koveya that it's going to be on Shabbos, then that's not a problem. And that's okay. Another, here. Yeah. And just another point to talk about is, we discussed once, I'm going to come back to that again, overnight deliveries from Friday. So the problems over here are, is that number one, you're kaveh al l'malachta b'Shabbos. You're asking the guy, mitzad echad is a kablan, he's not working by the hour or anything like that, but he is your shliach to send it, to send it. So you could say that to perhaps, since you're having a set amount, so you're not paying him for the tircha or whatever, you're paying for the delivery. You're paying for the actual delivery, and you make a set amount for that. So he's really a kablan, and so he's a contractor for this work. It's a contract work. It's not an hourly work. It's not and your katzatz also, there's a set amount for it. So you could say a daitav nashei kavod. He's doing it for himself, because that's the call where we say it. However, we have this issue over here that since you stipulated it's going to be for Shabbos, then we've had the problem cropped up a number of times from the Rishonim, is that it's kovei malachta b'Shabbos. Now, we spoke about this previously back in Reish and Daled, that this issue of kovei malachta b'Shabbos does not have a makar in Shas. There's a rise to it from Kama Rishonim, we say this. A number of Rishonim bring out a quote. They talk about this stipulation. You can never stipulate that the goy is going to work on Shabbos, but the makar for that is not so clear. And it seems from the Rishonim we learned back in Reish and Daled that it's sort of a Maris Ayin type of a thing. It's not a real Isra Me'ikar din. It's more of a Maris Ayin type of thing. Haraya, we saw back in Reish and Daled from the tax collector that it's going to be a hefsed gadol for him to not have somebody collecting the taxes for him every single day of the week, because he put a big investment into it. It's a big daily investment. He has to get back the coverage for that. So for Shabbos, and only for Shabbos, he's appointing a guy to do that, to do the collection for him. And he's going to, but over there they spoke out that you make it into a kabbalah also. You make it into a, you're not working by, you're not working directly for the Jew. He's going to get 10 rubles for every 100 rubles he collects. So that turns it into being paid by the job. And so it's katzatz, and he's a kabbalah for that. The sof kol sof, we had the problem of your kovei malachta b'Shabbos. You are makpid that he works on Shabbos. That's the whole point over there. So they said for that isser of kovei malachta b'Shabbos, it helped to have hesed meruba. So that became the sort of the makar for this concept of hesed meruba for kovei malachta b'Shabbos. It started from there. And how could you say that? We don't find a heter of hesed meruba for stam amir la'akum. If I'm going to lose a lot of money, I'm not allowed to just ask a guy to do a malach on Shabbos, not to lose a lot of money. So the answer is that over there, if it would be a real amir la'akum, which has an element of shlichus in it, and chanami, you couldn't. But since over there you made it into a kabbalah, right? It made it into it's a contract. It became a contract worker, and your kotetz the amount you're giving him. So then it's not really near la'akum. It's just like a side problem, which is more of a maris ayin type of thing, that when you're kovei malachta b'Shabbos, it looks more like you made it into a shliach, but it's not really. So that mixi, that maris ayin aspect that's there, that the Rishonim are machadish, not mefurish in the Gemara, but they're machadish that. So they were mekel in that prat when it comes to hesed meruba. So that's one of the reasons over here that if you have an overnight, generally if you're sending an overnight delivery from Friday to Shabbos, so if you're just doing a stam because it's convenient, then no. But if it's going to be in makom hesed meruba, number one, you have that to rely on. Because you're in a case of an overnight delivery, the guy's not your direct shliach. Your kotetz damim, and you're paying him for the delivery. So he's a contract worker, and you have your katzatz. So it's all that's left. The problem that's left is this issue of kovei malachta b'Shabbos. So that's number one. We have another tziruf. The Achronim said, we spoke about this back in the past, that also there's the heter of amira la'amira, which you said might be a makar in the Rambam in our sugya. The Rambam points out that you give it to the postmaster and he gives it to another guy to send it. Why does Rambam need to say that? He's maramis to this concept of amira la'amira. That's not direct shlichus anymore, but the one who actually takes the letter is not my shliach. He's being paid by the central distribution company, in that case the post office. So he's not my shliach anymore, he's his shliach. And the Mishnah Berurah says not to be samach on that alone, but we have that together with this other svara of hesed meruba. And there's a third svara as well that is brought down by other achronim, that the one who's bringing the letter or whatever it is not only your shliach. He's actually he's always going to be bringing a lot of letters to a lot of other people. Right? FedEx is not sending a plane and then sending a whole delivery truck just to deliver your letter or your package. They're flying anyway, and they have a whole plane full of stuff. So it's more like a marba b'shiurim, just adding it to the package. And as long as it's in the same kli, which in this case the airplane will be the kli, and then the truck will be the next kli that's all being taken from. So there's never any halacha b'shus harabim, b'shus yachid b'shus harabim, or chutz l'tchum or anything like that. That's going to be directly just for you. So it's just a ribu b'shiurim. It's agav all the other packages and mechtavim that are being brought. So with Siruf, all these reasons, there are even other reasons. So there are poskim, like the Machzeh Eliyahu we mentioned back in the day. Machzeh Eliyahu Rafal, that's all from Gateshead. So he has a long tshuva that's matter the whole thing l'chatchila, even not b'shas l'tchak, for that reason. But the Minchas Yitzchak and other poskim, and also heard from Shmuel first, Shlita, that we're only matter this b'shas l'tchak with mitzvah. Each reason on its own right is not really enough to be matter. So we're not going to Mimatra Stan l'chatchila to do it, just to not take Shabbos into consideration. But when there is a hefsid gadol, like we've had cases where someone, like a diamond dealer, has a potential customer, has to get it to his branch because the customer is going to be there Saturday night, leaving Sunday, has to get it there, be there by Shabbos to be able to present the diamond Motzei Shabbos. Then that, if not, there'll be a hefsid gadol. Then such a thing, then we could do an overnight delivery to arrive in Shabbos. And who we did, we say l'tzarach mitzvah. For example, someone needs to go to the mikvah on Motzei Shabbos, and you live in Slobodkaville, Tennessee. No one to paskin for you over there. So you want to send it to a posek that's going to look at it for the mikvah Motzei Shabbos. So you send it, no signature required. Don't forget that part because you're going to be stuck at it. It's going to go back to sender. If not, make sure you check no signature required, and it's going to be dropped off on Shabbos, and then that's the Sarach Mitzvah that the posuk should be able to look at it on Motzei Shabbos. There are a number of other issues as well, which we're not going to have time to go into now, but maybe some other time we can talk about it a lot. If you have people who own companies that have delivery, people order stuff online, and then there's always an option to get regular delivery or overnight delivery, etc. And you have this company that even though the order is going automatically online, but then the delivery people that it's going out of whatever warehouse. The question is it your account that's being used to send it out or not? Is there in each case it's not a hefsem ruba to be sending it out, but perhaps it is considered hefsem ruba in general if you can't have things sent out at all, and through this whole mechanism. So it gets very complicated. That's a whole separate discussion on Zohar. Maybe sometime we'll go through all that because it's very fascinating. Because the poskim, when they talk through all these shilas, you have overnight deliveries coming out of your company. You also have a request for overnight drop-offs coming to the company. And is it coming from the base Israel? Is it coming from is it being delivered out of your company, out of the where, or is it coming, or is it just the delivery dock that's coming from? And there's a lot of different things go into that, and a lot of the things in our postgame and our sugya come into play. It becomes like I would say that like a posek has to have all of like Shas and poskim in his toolbox, and then when Shas come up, they know how to pull this out and how to deal with this. You have all the tools there to deal with it. So it's very good shmak to see what the poskim say that our sugya comes into play so much. I guess we'll take it from there. Okay.
Thank you, Abby.
Sure. Have a good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.
You too.